Fantastic, guys. This is David from Welliba. He'll be bringing you through your talk today. In terms of any questions you have for David, please reserve them for the end. You can submit them through slido.com. So if you go to slido.com, slido.com, room 1202, you can submit your questions there. I'll be curating them and going through them with David at the end. If there is any follow-up questions you have after that, please you raise your hand at the end. But without further introduction, please, David, take it away.
Can you hear me? Okay, so we want to make sure that you get some maybe new and useful information about how to have a great year one experience as you enter the workplace, post-qualifying from your course, your degree, your master's, and whatever it is that you've spent your time doing over the last couple of years. So one of the key themes that all companies and all individuals are heavily focused on at the moment is, what does employee experience mean? What does that mean to an individual, an organization? And what does a good experience look like, both in the context of the person themselves and the environment they work within in an organization? And what Shifra, my colleague, and Simon and myself work a lot on at Welliba is how to design systems and to design strategies for companies to make sure that individuals joining companies have a great experience. And that then leads to things around acquiring new skills, higher performance levels by individuals, higher performance indicators and higher commercial numbers or net promoter scores with customers, more effective teams, higher engagement, being able to learn better, less likely to be sick, and overall having a better quality of life and a work-life balance at work. So in general, it leads to kind of a symbiotic win-win dynamic between the individual and the company. Not a lopsided one where the individual expects to get all the benefits from the relationship, or where a company expects to misuse its power over the employee and get more than really is justified out of that individual while they enter the workforce. So, if we're looking at a definition about employee experience, it describes how employees experience their work, their life, and that in combination. And the employee experience then is described about how that is presented, about the combination of them with their environment. So, if you know which things boost and block you, things where you have strengths or failings, you can learn from these and you can become more aware of them, and you can develop tactics and strategies and methodologies that empower you to be able to prosper better by, I think, having better self-awareness of what's present. So before we go into some of the aspects about developing a great employee experience, I'm sure some of you have heard of the Great Resignation. Have you heard about this? Well, you haven't started yet, so maybe it's not relevant, but in the US alone, in April 2021, 4 million people quit their jobs. And there's been an increasing trend over the last decade, but accelerated by the pandemic, where more and more people per year, particularly people early on in their job, we'll say where you're heading into in that first 1 to 2 years being onboarded, resign from their job, quit, leave, for many reasons, some to do with better opportunities in other jobs, but many to do with situations where they're kind of unhappy, or they're unfulfilled or unsatisfied, or they don't feel empowered or enabled to do a great job in the workplace. Now, the reasons people have given for this are not good wages, rising cost of living, hostile work environment, lack of benefits, lack of career advancement, remote work, hybrid work, not being happy with the content of work. But while the pandemic kind of has given rise to an acceleration, it doesn't explain it all. Now, this has obviously made for a challenging environment for individuals where in many, like we have a lot of clients through Welliba where in banking and professional services, sometimes in the first 2 years, companies have lost 50% of the graduate intake within that 2-year period. So after spending a huge amount of money attracting and acquiring that talent, it's ended up with a quite short experience that hasn't been that great or productive for individuals or companies. And what we're working on doing is how to reduce the characteristics for the individual and the company that tend to cause that to happen, so you have a better and longer and more productive relationship with your employer. Now, companies obviously get very, very concerned about losing people, because without people they can't do billable hours, or they can't get their work done or their project done or serve customers or build product or whatever it is. But this has also then become exacerbated by a concept called quiet quitting. Has anyone heard about quiet quitting? No? Yes? Mark's heard about it. That's because he's in a job. But quiet quitting is more about where people are saying, I'll do my job, but I'll only do my job. It's like, I'll start my job at 9 and I'll quit my job at 5, and I'll only do my job when I'm not on my breaks, and I'll only do my job, not other people's job. And I won't get involved in other activities outside my core job description. And it's very much like only expending the effort on which you're paid to do in your job description. So historically that would be called like work to rule, or just to the letter of the law. Some of this also has origins in China. Myself and the colleagues, in my previous company that I owned, we had like teams in 40 countries, and we had big teams in Shenzhen in southern China, which is like the Silicon Valley of southern China. And the work culture there was like 996. It means you work 9 to 9, 6 days a week. So 72 hours a week, so it's pretty much always on. And that's what companies expected for people to thrive and prosper. And you had to be available to do work, do anything for your employer all the time. But then a trend started to emerge of people, what they call lie flat. So it means, I think in Ireland that would mean like go under the radar. It would mean like reducing your willingness to give discretionary effort. And companies, when they have graduates who have versatile talents and multiple skills, they really need you to want to contribute in wider, diverse ways, and to do lots of things and learn things beyond just what you're paid for in your specific job. So this quiet quitting combined with great resignation is really bad for companies. Because now not alone do you have people leaving, you have nearly people staying who are kind of not doing things properly and not being very flexible or productive. However, companies then become quite intolerant of this, and managers find it difficult to work with colleagues who are not engaged or are wanting to participate in work. And now we have this type of dynamic. So if you hadn't heard of great resignation or quiet quitting, you probably hadn't heard of the quiet firing. This is a symptom and a consequence where managers then become more like passive aggressive, whereby you have the people who will participate, who are enthusiastic, who are enjoying and learning, and they kind of move them into a positive place and giving them access to more career advancement, more learning, more opportunities, more interesting projects. And the ones who they call the quiet quitters, they're moving them more over into an area, less interesting work, not pay rises, not inviting them to learning opportunities. And it's kind of segregating into kind of a group of ones who they're supporting and ones who they are in effect isolating. And this is really negative too, because it's toxic and it's hostile, and it leads, it's not like bullying, but it's pushing people, it's like retaliation for the companies against people not working the way that they would have liked them to have done 5 or 10 years ago. So we know that if you look through things like LinkedIn and surveys, you end up with like nearly half of people see it in the workplace, and a third of people experience it. Now, we really don't want you to end up being a resigner for a bad reason. It's fine to move on to a new job that's better, that's great. We don't want you to be like a quiet quitter who ends up only doing what's written in your job description, because that's actually not a good way to act and operate in the world of work if you want to succeed. And we don't want you to be quite fired, which is to be like pushed into like, you know, an isolation zone and just left there to in effect deteriorate. So, you know, all of this would mean that the situation is a bit challenging, and 50% of employee turnover in most jobs occurs in first year of employment. And we know that a lot of people in first year of a job are struggling. Now, this was always the case to some degree, historically, when starting work. But some of the dynamics of people's expectations and companies and ways of working has kind of exacerbated this. What we want to show you next now is that huge amounts of effort by companies is going in to try and reduce the negative impacts around this, but to give people a great experience to be able to self-serve and manage and organize themselves so that they're able to thrive and prosper individually, in teams, with managers and an organization. So we're just going to show you a little concept about how this works. We've synthesized our research and our business in Welliba down to some short little videos and bits of content, so you might be able to have a framework in your head that you can use to think about how you make a positive experience as you enter work. So there's really two things going on. There's yourself and there's the context. So the self is you and the context is the work. And you are a person who will be onboarded into a new environment. And this is where the interface happens between you and the opportunity to do well or to suffer to some degree. So yourself is your personalities, your values, your strengths. The context is information, organization, work environment, role, team. We know that people are not so self-aware. Only 1 in 10 people really in general has very good self-awareness or insight about what impacts them positively or negatively inside their own self or the context. So we're trying to help people understand that better so they can act more intelligently. So we just want to give you a little video about how employers are now trying to approach this to make things better. So most good employers will be doing something about this, and you should be tuned in when you're joining your work to begin with, that you're seeking out the resources, the programs, the people, the activities that are designed to enhance employee experience. And don't ignore them or think, well, they're not really that important to me about how I learn and I'm just here to do my work or focus on my functional tasks. So we're just going to play this little video that you should be able to hear a bit on. Okay, so most organizations will have some kind of technology or learning management system or employee experience system or onboarding platform that is set up with lots of resources, either events, seminars, digital resources, people to work with, that should help you around these areas. The three main areas that we're trying to educate people around to be stronger on is around feeling good, realize your potential, and personal resources. So feeling good is more like your well-being, your health, your physical and mental health. Your potential is around your ability to learn, to be curious, to focus. And personal resources are things about like your connectedness, your network, your resilience, your confidence. So when you take care of these 12 things within your context, you're much more likely to be able to make decisions based on positive information than end up being derailed or knocked to one side or overwhelmed by problems that cause you to quit or to be isolated in the workplace or feel that you're less able to contribute. And So when you're talking to the employers out there, or when you start work, you should ask them about what do they do to try and create a great employee experience that supports them to get the most out of you, but allows you also to contribute as best as you can, as quickly as you can. Because all of them will be very familiar with this language, with these words. So when you talk about employee experience and what do they do to optimize your productivity, but also to retain you and make you more effective, your employer will usually respond positively to like that, and the ones trying to hire you will see that as a good line of discussion for you to have with potential employers. So I think that some of the things we want you to have a think about is, what factors in your work context boost your ability, what things block your ability to perform, what things in yourself do you think boost your ability, what things in yourself block your ability, and kind of what's your own level of awareness on these, and are you going to seek help for these if you get stuck? So for example, if you find it hard to network with people and you find it hard to take a first step to talk to somebody, you should be more explicit about that and seek help. Or if you are having difficulty around something to do with your performance or to learn certain content, you should try and work out what the things are and to try and use the systems in companies to get support on that quickly, and to try and maximize how well you can manage all those attributes about yourself and context. Okay, so Mark, can I hand it over to you?
David, everyone, please. Perfect. Well, so I suppose we'll go on to the Q&A piece here, guys, and the first one came in from Anonymous. Was, I suppose, can you elaborate on Welliba and the, self-aware help you do give to, organizations and individuals?
Well, at Welliba, what way we primarily help organizations is that they usually have lots of good intentions and oftentimes good resources, good expertise and people and opportunities. But oftentimes these assets and resources are not very well organized around a personalized model for the individual. And everybody kind of gets the same things, or things are communicated in quite an unintelligent or boring way. Whereas the way that we're trying to encourage companies and individuals to think is that if you can set it up so that a person does a bit more self-diagnosis, is able to build a little bit of a persona of themselves, we then have all the resources and assets and insights and nudges and advices set up through an AI and an automated system so you can access it yourself and you can manage more of your learning in a way that's better prioritized for you. And the company, while respecting your privacy, can see trends at a team and a larger level, and they can work out what to do on a bigger sense of where to invest and make decisions. But you don't have to wait for the manager or wait for the company to do something about things. You can get support immediately through the companion app. And that's what we're doing.
Okay, fantastic. I suppose that brings me on to my next question. I suppose, how important is it knowing your own personal style, your own personal brand within the company in terms of adjusting to your own company's expectations from day one, or upon realizing that, I suppose, you're not working in the same way as the rest of your colleagues?
Yeah, well, I think that it is shocking to most people that all this type of research shows that only 1 in 10 people have good self-awareness or self-insight. It's a bit like 90% of people think they're an above-average driver, which is like Mark, it's kind of like it's actually impossible. So, first of all, I think that it's really good that people probably acknowledge that they have a distorted probably sense of what they're good at or not good at, and they don't really understand themselves often very well. And I think that it is important that people are able to understand really what impact does their mood or their sentiment or their relationships or their connectivity or their mastery have on their overall sense of efficacy and their own ability to perform continuously. So I think that it's really important that if you're able to identify that maybe like you're super strong on your ability to learn skills, but you're maybe not so good at maybe delivering on social connectedness, or maybe like you're super productive in a very erratic way, that you're like very powerful for a week, but then you totally collapse. That you're kind of aware of that, so that you know that like if that's your style, that even that you're able to discuss that with your manager, so that the manager, if you end up like being somebody who's kind of going, oh, I'm just not, really in a mood to put huge productivity in today. I nearly killed myself last week trying to deliver on a huge project, that they can kind of maybe understand that at least and know that it's not that like there's some huge problem and you don't have to be hiding something. Or maybe they try and work with you to see, can you kind of manage things more in an organized way out over time so you don't go through these massive peaks and troughs. But it just makes you more intelligent about how to have a dialogue with yourself and with others. And again, being able to understand this is the first step on being able to do something useful for yourself.
That wisdom would have been very useful to me about 10 or 12 years ago. But I suppose we've got two final questions. What effect will quiet quitting have in 5 to 10 years that we potentially don't foresee or we haven't quite seen yet in terms of the wider economy or in terms of, I suppose, organisations? Will it be something we'll see the effect of now, or is it something that's further down the line?
I think that what's happened with the quiet firing is a pretty predictable response to line managers and business leaders getting a bit aggravated, where they feel that employees have had a very strong set of leverage on the terms, conditions, pay, opportunity, work experience they have. And because there's a huge surplus of jobs, the war for talent and their ability to attract talent has been somewhat restricted. And I think that companies feel that they have had to accommodate even workers that they don't think were very productive. And then at the same time, the workers are not very happy because they feel that their work environment has been very disrupted, and working from home or hybrid working or lack of access to colleagues and resources, or maybe you can't get promoted or learn or advance because you're not in the right relationship with the right people in a company. And I think with younger workers, this has become a really massive challenge. I would hope that what we get is kind of a more sophisticated relationship would emerge around how experience works well for individuals and companies, and as both employees begin to re-emerge as being wanting to put in more discretionary effort, and organizations realize that it's not really feasible to expect people to do this 996 culture or 5 days a week always in an office, and that they need to accommodate a more diversity of thinking and a way to allow people to be able to operate with a little bit more flexibility. A lot of the huge employers in the technology space, for example, would have had a huge emphasis on what they would describe as great employee experience. But some of that has become perceived as they made fantastic workplaces where you in effect lived in there and had your breakfast, had your social life, had your dinner, had your relationships, did your sport, and that's probably now past to some degree, and that people don't want to be in some kind of luxury prison either. So I think it will modify over time, and possibly some of how this might happen is that if there is some kind of slowdown about the availability of jobs. I think one of the things at the moment is there's just such a shortage of people to do lots of jobs that you have a lot of frustrated employers who feel like they're not getting a great deal, and an awful lot of individuals who have probably loads of choice, but they feel like what they're getting isn't exactly what they wanted. Yeah. But I think it will improve with a bit of thinking on both sides.
So one thing will affect the other eventually. I suppose the final question is, and I think it's something you touched on in one of your answers a moment ago, but I'll just bring it up again. If you are struggling, especially in a hybrid environment, remote working, in the office 1, 2, 3 days a week, how important can a network be of, I suppose, individuals at your level and kind of, I suppose, up the hierarchy and up the tree in the organisational chart be to having that network to, I suppose, assessing your way of working, talking very candidly and kind of getting advice on how you could change or how you could, I suppose, tinker with your way of working or your style of working?
Yeah, and I think this again is a two-way street with the employer and the individual. Some companies are great about constantly trying to promote ecosystems of people being connected virtually, or giving people mentors, or creating social activities outside work, or holding physical on-site events in work to bring people together in. But one thing I would say is that it is detrimental for probably your health, your well-being, your career advancement, your learning, if you end up in a virtual environment and you're doing a job and all you're doing is the task and you're working on that in isolation and you're just delivering on the practical outputs that are expected of you day to day, like you're going to end up on the wrong side of the equation about fulfillment, experience and advancement in work. And some companies are great at organizing this virtually or in person. Some companies are not very good at doing this. And I think you need to ask the questions of the employers out there about how do they do all this, like if you're working on site, if you're working virtual, if you're working hybrid. And you should ask the questions in, how do I participate with you? How do I meet people? How do I contribute? How do I teach people? How do I help people? So you shouldn't go around with one arm longer than the other, just expecting it to be them to give you everything. But don't end up on your own in a virtual environment at home, getting paid like a good salary, because that won't last very long. You'll be looking for a new job or you'll be forgotten.
Well, guys, is there any more questions for David or the Welliba team? We'd be happy to take them now. Otherwise, I think just a round of applause for David and the Welliba team, please.